Welcome everyone to this virtual meeting of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee for Dorset Council on Tuesday the 12th of May 2021. Welcome to any members of the public watching this meeting. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Shane Bartlett, Chairman of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making processes to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and council staff in accordance with the government's guidance on social distancing by applying new regulations issued by government for holding meetings from remote locations. This meeting is being live streamed to the public and recorded both by audio and video. Public participation will take the form of written questions as opposed to public speaking. Please can I remind all councillors to ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent during the meeting. For the benefit of the public, I will now take a roll call. Councillor Andy Canning, Vice Chairman.
Here.
Councillor Rod Adkins.
Here.
Councillor John Andrews.
Present.
Councillor Brian Heatley.
I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Mike Parks.
Morning, Chairman. Present.
Councillor Mark Roberts.
Morning, Chairman. I'm also present.
Councillor David Shortell.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm present.
Councillor David Took. Councillor Bill Trite. Okay, thank you, members. The officers attending the overall agenda are John Selgren, Executive Director of Place, Jonathan Mayer, Corporate Director for Legal and Democratic Monitoring Officer, Aidan Dunn, Executive Director for Corporate Development, Lindsay Watson, Senior Democratic Services Officer, and Megan Rochester, Producer for the meeting. Other officers will be introduced for each agenda item and making themselves known. I have a chairman's statement. At the annual meeting of the council on the 4th of May 2021, it was agreed that all council meetings that are not executive in nature will continue to be held virtually from the 7th of May 2021 until such a time as social distancing requirements are removed, currently scheduled to be lifted on the 21st of June 2021. Where a decision is required, committee members will express a minded to decision in respect of recommendations set out in the officers' reports, with decisions being taken under officer delegated authority in the light of minded to decisions expressed by members in the virtual meetings. The report on today's agenda asks the committee to be minded to make a recommendation to Cabinet on the 18th of May 2021. So if I could move to item 1 on the agenda, apologies. Ms Watson, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor David Took.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to declare now? Can I ask any member who does realise they have a declaration of interest, they can declare it at the time? Thank you. If I move to item 3 on the agenda, public participation. Do we have questions from the public, Ms Watson?
Yes, Chairman, we've received one question for this meeting from Helen Sumler. The question is this: At the last Scrutiny Committee, I asked a question about the lack of a current implementation plan for LTP3, which was responded to by portfolio holder Councillor Ray Bryan. While the answer was informative and interesting, it did not answer why it is acceptable to the Scrutiny Committee that no current implementation plan exists for LTP3. Although it is recorded on the minutes, one of the committee members commented that questions directed at the Scrutiny Committee were not answered by the committee. I believe it was mentioned that the committee would be able to review the questions and answers later. I am endeavouring to understand how the full impact of the decision not to produce and make available to the public the next scheduled implementation plan for LTP3 was considered, and what mitigating actions have and are being taken to inform the public about the implementation of LTP3 in the absence this implementation plan until such time as a new local transport plan is published. Could I ask if the Scrutiny Committee has reviewed my question and the answer given, and once again ask for an explanation of why it is acceptable that no current implementation plan exists for LTP3? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And if I may give the response now. Ms. Sumpler, thank you for submitting a question to the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Dorset Council operates the leader and cabinet model in which the cabinet makes decisions and can be held to account for its decisions by the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee and by our colleagues on the People and Health Scrutiny Committee. As the cabinet and not the Scrutiny Committee make final decisions about the local transport plan, I'm not able to answer for the cabinet the part of your question about the lack of implementation plan for LTP3. As this is an additional meeting, our Scrutiny Committee forward plan is not on the agenda for today's meeting. However, the committee can consider whether scrutiny of your concerns about the local transport plan and specifically about the lack of an implementation plan for LTP3 should be added to our work programme when the forward plan is considered at the next formal meeting of the committee. We can now move on to agenda item 4. Questions from members. Ms. Watson. I believe there are no questions being received.
That's correct, Chairman. We didn't receive any questions in advance from councillors.
Thank you. I'll move to agenda item 5. Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy Consultation Results and Recommended Changes to Final Draft. So we have a presentation, members, which is 40 minutes long. I'll take questions at the end of the presentation, please, so the officers can get through their presentation. This is going to be given by Anthony Littlechild, the Sustainability Team Manager, and Matthew Reeds, Community and Open Spaces Manager. And we have the portfolio holder, Councillor Ray Bryan, in the meeting as well. So if I can ask you gentlemen to take it away, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. My name is Matt Reeks and I'm the Coast and Green Space Service Manager. And I will be presenting the report along with my colleague Anthony Littlechild, as the Chairman has said. Members, if I may, I'm going to share my screen with you. You bear with me. Can everybody see that, Chairman?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So, members, an opportunity today to consider the results of the consultation and the subsequent changes to the final draft of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan. As members will be aware, the newly formed Dorset Council declared the climate emergency in April 2019, was subsequently amended to include an ecological emergency as well. The team, the sustainability team, the wider council officers, and also the cross-party EAP considered and developed the action plan and the strategy that sits behind it. And that was launched for consultation on the 29th of October. That ran initially for 6 weeks. It was extended until the 20th of January due to the implications of COVID and the lockdowns that were associated with it. And I think it's worth pointing out just a few statistics around the amount of work that went into publicising that consultation. At the time, it was the largest ever Dorset Council comms campaign related to a public consultation. And throughout the period, as you can see from the presentation, there was a number of press releases. It was included in the residents' newsletter, which is delivered to every house within the Dorset area, e-bulletins, Facebook posts, Twitter posts. There was paid advertising on local radio, internet advertising, direct emails to the initial call for ideas respondents and inquiry day presenters, schools, colleges, all of our town and parish councils, the Dorset LAP, and a variety of other partnership organisations. We'd hosted a webinar for Dorset Council councillors, and also one for town and parish councils, of whom they were all invited. And that was an opportunity for us to share with them the background to the consultation, and also offer advice on how Dorset Council and the various towns and parishes could take on board and help us publicise and engage the public with that. There was also, importantly, a variety of internal communications using our internal intranet system to ensure that we picked up all of the Dorset Council employees. Alongside the full consultation, we also ran a short survey. So this was developed following a discussion and some advice from the EAP. It was much shorter by nature than the main consultation. Important to note that it was there and still is there, still current, as an engagement tool. So its primary purpose was designed to invite people into the forum of consultation to then go forward and fill in the main consultation. Just a short overview of the results of the short survey. Currently we have 1,883 responses, which combined with the main consultation gives us a total of 3,402. From the short survey, 84% of the respondents were over 21. 87% felt that tackling climate change was vital or important. 92% of respondents felt that Dorset Council being carbon neutral by 2040 is a great idea or a reasonable idea. And only 12% managed a correct answer as to the amount of the Dorset area's carbon footprint, which Dorset Council is directly responsible for, the correct answer being 1%. So moving on to the full consultation. 1,519 responses were received. And the tables before you just give you an idea of the spread of where that 1,519 responses came from. As you can see that the under 18s were 0.6% of the respondents, and the largest group over 65s. Second largest group 45 to 64. So a trend there as to the age groups around the answering. And also on the right hand side of the screen, members, you'll see a breakdown of what the respondents recognise themselves as. 89.5% members of the public, 3.5% on behalf of an organisation, with some parish council and elected member responses there, 40 being the absolute number of parish councils, 2.6% of the overall respondent. Before you is a graphic representation of the location of the respondents given by postcodes. So you can see we've managed to reach across the Dorset Council area and also sort of just beyond as well on the fringes of it. So it feels that the representation we have is complete across the Dorset area. One of the questions in the survey was a direct replication of a question in the residents survey, which ran alongside and just after the climate and ecological survey, and that was asking respondents to rank a series of areas of focus in terms of importance. And the reason we've put this up is just to illustrate that from the respondents of the Climate and Ecological Survey, tackling climate change was considered to be second in terms of the Council's priorities. In the residents' survey, tackling climate change dropped to 9th importance. So just to illustrate, as expected, that those respondents filling in the Climate and Ecological Survey obviously felt that tackling climate change was a higher priority. Having said that, you'll see that protecting Dorset's natural environment was ranked number 1 in the climate survey and number 2 in the residents' survey. So overall, from the questions asked in the full Climate and Ecological Survey, by grouping together the various questions asked against each section for the sake of representation, you can see that the response was positive to all questions asked. The green lines representing positive answers, the red lines the agrees or disagrees. The way that this has been analysed is using a concept of net agreement, which in effect is taking all of the agrees or disagree, all of the agrees or strongly agrees against all of the disagrees or strongly disagrees, giving an overall indication of the net agreement or disagreement. So in this case, you can see ranked by the level of net agreement are the areas of questions. So taking the highest at 78.4% net agreement, down to 6.1 being the lowest for the Dorset area target. The important thing to note, as from the previous slide, is that the net agreement to all of the questions asked was positive. So moving through the questions, you can see up on the right hand side, again, is the net agreement, and this time it's per question. So you'll see the top line is representing the overall net agreement, down below the details. So 10.3% of respondents were disagree or strongly disagree, and 74.1 were in the positive. So that graph will be replicated as we go through the questions. So this is around Dorset Council's approach, the directly, indirectly, and influencing stance that we've taken, giving an overall net agreement of 63.8% of respondents agreed with that point. And interestingly, generally, it was felt that the targets were not quick enough and did not reflect the fact that it was an emergency. 37 of the 140 comments who disagreed with this point raised that particular point. In terms of the carbon targets, so members may recall there was 2 particular targets set, 2040 for Dorset Council itself to become carbon neutral, 10 years earlier than the national target. The overall net agreement to that was 17.1, 52.4% commenting in the positive, 35.3 in the negative. To the second carbon target, which is the whole Dorset Council area to become carbon neutral by 2050, in line with the central government's target, taking into account it will require the support of central government. The overall net agreement in the positive was 6.1%. And I've just put on there that there was an interesting point with this, that a number of the comments considered that it was not DC's problem, or was the sort of climate change denial piece, were a number of the comments that made up the disagreement with the 2050 target. So moving into the detailed questions of the 8 sections of the strategy and action plan, renewable energy being the first. The overall net agreement to that you can see was, sorry, bear with me, 64%, I think. And in terms of the individual responses, 55.1%. So at this point, it's just worth a little detail about the way in which the open text boxes were analysed. So within the consultation document, there was some tick boxes against strongly agree through to strongly disagree. And there was also an opportunity for respondents to comment in an open text format. It wasn't compulsory, but many people choose to do so. Overall, from the 1,500 odd responses, we received 12,000 individual text comments. So these were coded by the team against the 8 subject areas, and then tabulated to capture where similar comments had been received and put into groups according to the nature of the comment. Obviously, as members would imagine, from 12,000 comments, that was a huge amount of data that had to be clarified and categorized. So what we did is we took as a cutoff point 5%. So anything below 5% of overall responses, and many of them were actually individual responses, comments that had been made by only one person in some cases, or a handful of cases. And we've presented or considered those comments that were made by 5% or more of the respondents to that question. So on the screen before you, you'll see those comments that made that cut regarding renewable energy. So there was a total of 1,279 individual written comments about the renewable energy section, and you'll see those are listed up there. I'm not going to go through these individually. I'll leave that to Anthony, who'll discuss that a little further in the presentation. Buildings, you'll see again a high level of overall net agreement regarding our approach in terms of what we can directly, indirectly deal with, and that we can influence. And then a 55.1% net agreement around the actual action plan. So that section of the strategy and action plan that deals with specifically what Dorset Council is intending to do. Food and drink, you can see over 70% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed, giving us a net return of just under 70%. And again, 73% net agreement to the particular actions that we proposed. The economy, the economic section of the action of the strategy, again came in high net agreement, taking us through to 71.5% net agreement with the actual actions that we proposed. Waste, this was one of the highest, came in at just over 80%. And the same again, 78.5% with those actions that we'd listed. Water, this was the highest of all of them. And again, you can see a 77.3% net agreement, sorry, 72.2% net agreement with the actions that we considered. Natural assets, again, high overall net agreement and a 73% net agreement with the actual actions that we had proposed, with 748 people making individual comments about that section. Transport, 70-odd% overall net agreement, and a slightly lower 63.3% net agreement with the actions that we have proposed to take. 856 individual comments against that section. Making it happen, this was the section of the strategy and action plan where we looked at how Dorset Council would provide leadership and governance around the actions that we proposed in the action plan, and 57.2% of our respondents felt that that was the correct way to go about things. Funding approach, again, 64.3% of people agreed or strongly agreed, against 14.7% that didn't, giving us overall net agreement of just under 50%, 49.6%. The engagement and communication section. So this again is where we dealt in the general terms with how we would go about engaging the public and the wider Dorset area and partners with our strategy and action plan, and also how we would communicate the progress of the action plan. Was 67.3% net agreement, and interestingly, again, there was a sort of a small proportion of the respondents who reflected the sort of disagreement with the entire sort of climate emergency concept in this particular question. Just put some detail there around the monitoring and reporting. So this is where we ask people, would they like to be informed, how often they'd like to be informed. 6 months was the favoured interval for the progress to be monitored and reported on. And 86.4% of respondents saying they would be interested in that sort of ongoing engagement piece with how the progress of the action plan was developing. And then at the bottom, an interesting sort of example of how people would like to be communicated, and you'll see that the e-newsletter, digital reporting, was favoured by 70.7%. Members, thank you very much. I shall hand over to Anthony Littlechild, who will share with you how we've taken those individual comments that provided the detail and worked them into the reviewed action plan.
Thank you, Mr. Reeks. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Hi, my name is Anthony Littlechild. As introduced, I am the Sustainability Team Manager. I'm just going to try and share my screen if I can, or we can scroll down to the other appendices. What I wanted to just do is spend a little bit of time just explaining sort of how we've actually analysed the results and how we've come up with the recommendations for changes to the strategy document. So attached to the paper are two appendices. The first appendix, which you can see on the screen, is the consultation response report, which is a detailed analysis of the results, which my colleague Matt Reeks just sort of summarised in his presentation. So that gives you the sort of full details of what was received and how it was received, and various tables of the statistics. But what I want to do is just explain the Appendix B, if I could. We could either move to Appendix B. I don't know whether you can see that at all. Could we expand it out a little bit? So what Appendix B does, which is also attached to your papers, is provide a sort of explanation, a rationale of how we've dealt with all the different 12,000 comments and how we've come up with recommendations for changes to the strategy document. So as Matt outlined, we had 12,000 text responses which we had to analyse, and these went through a coding process, which is a recognised process of looking through all of those comments, some of which were pages long, trying to pick out what the key issues were within each of those responses, and then collating them together to look at how often different issues were raised and how big an issue they were from the collective responses. So in this table, what we've done is obviously we've looked at all the responses to each of the different sections of the strategy as outlined. This extract on the screen just shows you a little bit, so around the targets, our approach and renewable energy. We then looked at, so we coded all 12,000 responses, and then we looked at basically the top 5% within each of those topic areas. We recorded the number for each area. So for example, the one on renewable energy had about 12,079 responses. It identified a number of issues which are in the subject area column, and we recorded how many times those issues came up. So on the first one, you can see there 207 times people mentioned that planning should insist on new buildings having renewable energy integrated into them, and that was 16% of those 12,000 responses. We then did an analysis back onto the strategy, looking at how well the strategy had already picked up on that issue, whether it had already covered that issue completely, in which case we said it did, whether we felt it had partly considered that issue, in which case it was partly, and then if we felt it had already covered in the strategy, we have identified in the wording column where in the strategy we think those things are already covered. If we felt they were only partly covered or not covered at all, there was then a recommendation for changes to the strategy. So I'm not intending to sort of go through the whole thing in detail, because it's quite long and it's quite complicated. But basically that document sets out the various recommendations within each of these different areas. Also within the paper itself highlights a number of sort of recurring themes which were raised a number of times across the different areas. So these related to things like the targets needing to be faster, the overall language needing to be a little bit stronger, clearer, and the need for clear monitoring and reporting. And those are discussed within the document itself, within the paper, in paragraphs 9.9 to 9.17. So that was really what I was going to say. I wasn't intending to run through it in detail, as you've already had it, but obviously we're available to take questions as required.
I'm perfectly happy for you to go into a little bit more detail if you want, Anthony. I was told this was a 40-minute presentation.
Okay, I can go through each section broadly if you like, if you'd like me to sort of whiz down, but it would be easier if I share my screen. If that's okay.
Thank you.
Bear with me a moment. Can you see that? That's about as large, I think, as I can sort of make it. It's quite a long document, so it's quite hard to go through in a great deal of detail. It's about the largest. Can you see my screen? I've still got the
Chairman, it's Lindsay. Just to say, we've still got our producer sharing the agenda at the moment, so I'm not sure Mr. Littletard has shared his screen at the moment.
Try again. How is that? Can you see that?
Yeah, we've got yours, Anthony. That's fine. We've got it. Thanks.
Great, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So the first two sections you've got on here is the section on targets. So the key comments that were raised around the council target and the Dorset County area target was that there was overall net agreement, but there was a stronger feeling on these areas in particular that these dates should be earlier. As mentioned in the paper, these were discussed with the executive advisory panel, who felt that the recommendation ought to be that these targets should stay, but highlighting the fact that there are graded targets within the strategy. So there are sub-targets for each of the 5-year budgets, if you like, which mean that it's not it's a rapid decrease as fast as possible from now, not necessarily a linear path down to these targets. So it sets some stretching targets for 2025 and 2040. I think the one for the Dorset Council was about a 40% reduction by 2025, down to about 70% by about 2030. If you're happy, I'll just continue. That there also within the our approach section, we'd included, I think I've included a number of points which were raised at the last scrutiny meeting and also picked out by across the board. So the fact that we needed to strengthen or to make more mention of climate change adaptation, more expansion on our carbon footprint in terms of other greenhouse gases and what other things should we be including within our carbon footprint, and strengthening our overall sort of commentary and approach on the ecological emergency. So we picked up recommendations in there around those three points, around making sure that going forward we are undertaking or reviewing our previous risk assessments, climate change risk assessments with the latest information, updating and deciding on our approach, and exploring how we can expand the carbon footprint to include other areas, particularly things around land use and other greenhouse gases, and making sure that we're sort of strengthening some of our work around ecology. Is that okay? I shall continue on if you're happy for me to just continue. Within renewable energy, the key issues that were sort of picked out were things around the need for new buildings to incorporate renewable energy, the need for Dorset to support offshore wind power, greater sense of urgency needed, which was one of the broader themes, and the need for lobbying government to again ensure planning is improved. Looking at fossil fuels and other renewable energy technologies such as hydro, marine, etc. And some of those we felt were already covered quite well within the strategy, and a few of those we felt weren't. Some of which were around looking at what we could do to encourage zero carbon homes through the powers that we have, and working with partners to get us maybe a sort of southwest approach. It's hard to sort of go down this list. Much of the lobbying stuff was already included in there, and including that we obviously had climate change at the heart of our sort of decision making for larger decisions around a whole range of things. In terms of buildings, again, it was the key thing that came up was around the need for zero carbon buildings going forward, and that we should be encouraging buildings now to be zero carbon, anything new that we build, making the targets faster, emphasising the fact that one of the biggest issues is going to be retrofitting the existing housing stock across the whole of the county, and that needs to be more emphasised in the strategy document. Again, the language needing to be strengthened, the need to lobby central government, that was again a theme across the board. The need for Dorset Council to sort of lead by example on its own estate in terms of making its buildings zero carbon, and doing what we can through the planning system to ensure that new developments are building to the highest standards we can, or encouraging zero carbon buildings within the sort of powers that we have. I think that was it generally on the buildings things. I think most of those we felt were partly in there. and that we could try and do more to try and encourage a zero carbon building sort of approach. Obviously, it's very much linked with national policy, and there's definitely need more to be done in terms of, or more to be done within the strategy in terms of highlighting what we could do on retrofitting existing houses across the county, and other areas we felt were already covered quite well within the strategy, particularly things like what we're doing on our own estate. Are you happy with me to carry on?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to carry on for a bit longer.
Sorry, good. Okay, food and drink. So food and drink, the key points I think that were occurring here was around obviously farming and farm practices and sustainable farming practices, the protection of soils, again related to sort of land management practices, the encouraging retail to sell more local natural food produce, the need for considering how to reduce the amount of meat and move towards sort of vegan, vegetarian lifestyles, promoting home growing and encouraging lifestyle changes for food, basically. So I think the key recommendations that were picked out from there was we felt that a lot of those things possibly already in the strategy, already identified as actions, but there could be more strengthened in terms of particularly working with sort of county farms on best practice, and then using that to share best practice out across the wider farming community, or vice versa, and a few others in there related to sort of home growing and retail. Key actions, key issues identified within economy was diversification of pension funds from fossil fuels, zero carbon or low carbon sustainable tourism and the opportunities for developing that within the county, and making sure that our own Dorset Council's own procurement processes and policies proactively sort of support sustainable low carbon products and services. So I think we felt there were already actions relating to all of those in the strategy, and no, there wasn't really anything needed to be changed within the strategy. Those are all identified as issues already within there. Water, again, was about issues around nitrogen pollution and water quality, things around introductions of beavers within Dorset, working with schools, and engagement of community and the public on the risks relating to climate change, in particular sort of flood risk and sea level rises, coastal erosion, the need for natural protection of water resources through things such as wetlands and development, and the need to make sure that new development is obviously being done in a way as protecting water resources, and to work with other organisations such as the Environment Agency to ensure we understand sort of risks relating to flood, future climate change, etc. So I think generally speaking, many of those actions already identified in the strategy. We've included something particularly around beaver introductions, which was not something specifically picked up in the strategy, and a few bits needed rewording to sort of clarify what we were trying to say in the actions that are already in there. So I think that's water. Natural assets, again, was sustainable farming, ecological practices for farming, tree planting and the need for more tree planting, the need for large-scale rewilding, and the need for making sure that trees are native trees planted in the right locations. And I think we felt that most of these were sort of partly covered, but they could be strengthened in terms of the actions. So things around again working with county farms and farmers to support best sustainable practice for farming, and working more proactively with partners in terms of identifying opportunities for large-scale rewilding projects. Waste, concerns around sort of plastics, commercial waste, fly tipping, more education on sustainable waste practices, things around the need for promoting circular economy and a circular economy approach, need for more recycling facilities, and need for avoidance for waste from landfill. So some of these were not specifically identified in the strategy, although they're sort of implicit in a lot of the waste section within the strategy. And so we've identified a couple of recommendations in terms of either lobbying government, setting up some targeted campaigns, providing improving facilities and waste infrastructure. Transport, again, a large section. So this was largely around, fairly obvious things around the need for move towards electric vehicles and hydrogen infrastructure for future transport. Need for public transport, greater public transport, better cycle, walking routes, more park and ride opportunities, the need for the actions to be more stretching, sustainable transport integrated into new developments and new land use, stopping idling in traffic and encouraging nearer travel or travel to local areas rather than people travelling miles to get to different things, so having local facilities, and then creating information in terms of publicity, etc. So again, a lot of these we felt were covered in the transport section. We've included a clearer, or recommending to include a clearer link towards hydrogen when this becomes a viable option. Updating, generally speaking, and I think that generally some of the actions either felt that we didn't need to take further action on those because they're already covered, or it's not something we could take action on. So the last section is sort of split into different areas. This is the making it happen section, the strategy. The first section is around leadership and governance. So the key comments were around the need effectively to work more collaboratively with a range of partners and community organisations for a sort of bottom-up approach, to proactively set targets and levels of ambition that enable us to monitor progress and feed that back. Set a strong example by leading by example, and educating people in what they can do, engaging wider stakeholders, and lost the last one because I can't put it tested on the screen. Involving more in relation to wildlife and ecology, which we picked up earlier on, and comments relating to cost and finance picked up in a second. Finance. Making sure we learn from others, making sure that we incorporate things into our decision-making processes in terms of climate change, and lobbying government, and making sure we have structures in place basically to deliver and maximise the benefits on climate change. So I think again we felt generally lots of those things already in the strategy, perhaps not as clearly, which is why people were raising them. So there's a few amendments suggested in terms of some of the wording and some of the areas for action. Some of them we felt were already covered. No further action was required. There's a section within the Make It Happen around engagement and communication. So again, these are very sort of similar things around engaging more widely with the public, and providing sort of more dialogue and information to the public, better engagement involving partnerships, networks, communities, etc. Those two very, very similar. Working with other organisations and using a whole range of different methods for communicating and sending messages and with various organisations. So again, I think the communication section within there is covers most of these issues, and we thought that all these were covered as actions within the strategy. There's a section on funding, so there was agreement and disagreement about whether we should increase council tax to pay for some action on climate change. Some saying we shouldn't, some saying we should. We should investigate other forms of funding, lobby government for funding, look at opportunities for using COVID funds, and look at basically how we can put in funding externally from government and other areas to maximise the opportunities for taking action on climate change. So again, a lot of these are already covered in the strategy. They just need sort of bulking up, if you like, and one of the actions within there is identifying a sort of finance strategy behind it in order for it to go forward. Section on finance identified then a whole range of other options and opportunities, particularly for raising funds, again lobbying government, looking at different community investment methods or models, looking at ways of incentivising people to take action, and again these all need to be, these are partly covered in the strategy but need to be part of the development of the finance strategy related to how we actually going to encourage this to happen, which is one of the actions in the strategy. I think the last section, which was around the last two sections, one was around reporting, and I think Matt already mentioned that we asked the question about how people would want to be updated on progress, and it was sort of generally agreed from the responses that people would favour us. It was sort of biannual 6-monthly report on progress, and identified a number of methods they would prefer, which I think were sort of general 6-monthly report, ongoing sort of information through social media, etc. And the last section was generally about communications and consultation, I think. This was the different methodologies, different methods for communicating. So I think these were all collated through the quantitative figures as well, which highlighted e-newsletters, our website, annual reports as being the favoured methods for getting out progress and reporting. I think that was it. Sorry, that's a very sort of long run through, but I hope that gave you a flavour for sort of the things that came through and how we approached it.
Yeah, that was excellent, Child. Thank you. I'm afraid I've got an echo coming through my headphones for some reason. Okay, if I can now move to, thank you officers for that, it was really good, beneficial. If I could move now to the portfolio holder, Councillor Bryan, please, to make a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. I've got an echo, unfortunately. Can people hear me clearly? Right, I'll try and get through it. Obviously, the difference between the climate change consultation and the residents survey really does highlight the fact that people are not as concerned as they should be over what we face going forward. Now, this is something that we are addressing both now and will be addressing in the future. It's very important that we get the residents on side with us, because a lot of the things that we need to do are in their control. So that's one point I would raise. We've set a target of 2040, and many people look at that and saying that's far too long. I've said right from word go that I would only support a target that I felt was realistic. And I think the word realistic sums up exactly where we are with the target. We could have gone earlier. We could have made promises, but I only want to make promises that we feel we can keep. And that's the reason that we stuck with a 2040 date and a 2050 date in line with central government to make sure that we deal with the rest of Dorset in those last 10 years. As Anthony has already pointed out, there is a phased way we get to the target of 2040. A lot of things happen earlier on, but there are things that will take time to deal with. We're going through a process at the moment of looking at our business as usual element. And if we look at what we've achieved so far, we've gone green on our energy. We've got test vehicles on our fleet, looking at the electrical vehicles. We've already purchased new plant and equipment that is electrically driven rather than fuel. And I have to point out that we've received the largest grant that the government have handed out on climate change of £19 million for our buildings within Dorset. I raise this because it's very important that people realise that every meeting I go to, and believe me, they are numerous, we get praised for what is our strategy and action plan. And the word realistic comes up many, many times during those meetings. I've got to say the team, and it's not a large team at the top of the tree, but underneath is a great number of officers and staff who have contributed towards the report you've got in front of you. This wouldn't have been possible without the support of every single department within our organisation. And I really do thank all the officers for their input into this. And of course, this is ongoing. As I've mentioned, we've got 19 million to spend, and that's got to be spent by the end of September. The work going into that, again, is phenomenal. People don't understand. It's ever so easy to get the money. It's not so easy to spend it in the fashion that we're being asked to spend it. Going forward, so much depends on government support, which is why I am concentrating all my energy and time attending numerous meetings. As I say, every time I attend a meeting, we get talked about as being a council that has got their plans correct. And I will say, young Anthony goes to national meetings, and I received some great reports back on what he is presenting on our behalf. And I thank Anthony for that. We need to look at where we are on target dates, because that is always going to be an issue. I feel that as each new council comes into effect, they need to look at the plan and make their own assessment on the final target date. I set a target date of 2040 via the EAP. It wasn't just me, but I do think there is a case that as each new council, for the members that are elected, they have a say in a review. I don't want to see us change the target date as it is now. What I want to do is suggest that we may want to look at saying that each new council would reassess the target date based on the most up-to-date information on both finance and technology. I raise the word finance because in the report there's £130 million worth of spend. And when I went to finance to say, in fact, I went to Councillor Gary Suttle and said, Gary, if I need to spend 130 over the next 10 years, what will that do to us? The response was, it'll put 5% on the tax bill. and that concerns me greatly, because that would take us to a referendum, and then this could derail this project, because I cannot see the residents supporting a 5% annual increase on their tax bill. I'm going to stop at that, Chairman, but obviously I am online to answer any questions, of which I hope there will be a number, because this is probably one of the most important projects that this council is taking on at a time when we're still trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, my congratulations to the team on making sure that we've kept this going throughout what is the most difficult period, when all of our staff are under tremendous pressure. Thank you, Chairman. You're on mute, Shane.
Beg your pardon, I've got a cough, so I didn't want to cough over everyone listening to it. Yeah, I concur with everything you said, Councillor Bryan, concerning the team and the vast amount of work that's gone into this. I'm happy for you to RTS in the box to give any clarifications that you feel you may wish to give during the debate and the questions. If I can now move to Mr. John Selgren, please.
Thank you, Chairman. John Selgren, Executive Director for Place. So just if I may, and good morning, members, just a few observations from me. The first is, of course, this is one of the largest pieces of strategy work that the new council has undertaken, and something that began the inaugural council meeting, where the council declared the climate and ecological emergency. And as others have said on this in this discussion ahead of me, that a lot of work has been done by members and officers of the council to progress the work, and that which you see before you this morning. Specifically, Chairman, just a reminder that the Scrutiny Committee was particularly keen to review the consultation process, and that's the part of the work that Mr. Reeks described earlier in the discussion. And I do hope that's something that the Scrutiny Committee will consider this morning, because important that you're able to affirm that there's been a robust and thorough consultation process ahead of this strategy going forward to the Cabinet meeting on the 18th of May. I'd also comment and reflect, and again, particularly the comments and presentation made to you by Mr. Littlechild, the wide-ranging nature of the strategy. I've said this is a large piece of strategy, but I think also, it's going to policy analyst myself by professional background, the wide-ranging nature of this strategy is something particularly noteworthy. And I think I'd want to thank my officer colleagues for the very comprehensive way in which they've approached this piece of work, and I think looked at a wide range of issues. Councillor Bryan's already made reference to SALEX funding. That's a very important thing for the council. So a £19 million investment into building stock, which we hope will be part of the delivery of this strategy. So again, I think helpful if members would like to reflect on that in the discussion that follows. And then finally, I'd observe, and this is actually made reference to in the report, but I'd just like to draw this out. It's important for us all to be aware. This is very much a living document. This shouldn't be a strategy that sits on the shelf. Clearly, things like the SALEX funding and other initiatives that Councillor Bryan has referred to, that members have committed resources to, will become the living demonstration of that strategy actually in practice. And I think in that sense, the strategy will need to evolve over time. So again, I want to encourage members this morning to make sure this does remain something which is a living, breathing part of the council's policy suite. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Selgren, thank you. Okay, members, I'm opening up now to questions to non-committee members. Is there anybody who wishes to speak? I can't see anything in the chat bar at the moment. Okay, I've got Councillor Joe Taylor. Councillor Jill Taylor.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. It was really useful. I found an awful lot of this information. There's just so much out there to try and read through. I found it quite daunting, I must admit. But first of all, what I would like to say is to congratulate you on this consultation, because it's pretty wide-ranging, and I think COVID provided, I think it's a really good piece of work. But one thing I would want to comment on is that all the way through, I had a feeling that it was comfortable. It was described as what did you describe it as? Realistic, which I find that quite a sad indictment. I want it to be aspirational. I want us to be really setting targets for some of this, that we are going to be pushing ourselves. Targets are a target. Some we'll make and some we won't. But the feeling I've got with this is that all the targets should be made, which I'm slightly disappointed about. On general questions, I note in the item on fuel, I think it was at the beginning, there's no mention of hydrogen as a fuel for heating houses. I'm aware that the gas companies are doing a heck of a lot of work at the moment so that boilers can be hydrogen ready, the pipeworks can all be hydrogen ready, and that's something I would really like to encourage into Dorset. There are areas of Dorset where we're not going to be able to put in heat source pumps and all those other sort of heat-ins. And I think it's incumbent on us to encourage whatever we can that is non-fossil fuel based, basically. Sorry, do excuse my cat in the background. So that was one point I would like to make. I think the finance is going to be a real challenge. There was a comment that a lot of the public don't really get what we're trying to do. And I think that's probably generally right. I think there are a lot of the public who think that climate change is somebody else's problem. A lot of people will say they are worried about it, but their actions don't actually show that. And I think sort of through finance and the comms that we do, we've really got to push that sort of thing out. The other thing that I was interested in that I can't see in this paper, in the questions, in the answers, is how does Dorset Council identify those most at risk from the impacts of climate change? And how are we going to assist them? And I think that's probably a wider question that is outside the context of this, because I do appreciate we're here to discuss the consultation document, but I think that is something that we do need to pick up at some time, and that's me with my people scrutiny hat on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Did any officer want to pick up any other comments from Councillor Taylor?
Chairman, it's John Sogan. I just acknowledge that and grateful to Councillor Taylor for those comments, which are thoughtful and thought-provoking.
Thank you. Okay, if I move next to Councillor Biggs, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would also agree to some extent that we perhaps prefer to see more stretch targets, and I think there is that danger. Complacency will build in, but we'll wait and see on that one. I suppose my thoughts is that, I'm really pleased that we got this 19 million, but I think people would like to know how that's going to be spent on buildings, and that it's not being used for perhaps things that we would have done anyway as a normal process, just bringing it forward, and we're going to get real benefits environmentally from that. It's not just stuff that we would have normally just changed a boiler, and it's just a little more efficient this time. I wonder if Councillor Bryant could actually elaborate on that, please.
Is that you, Councillor Bryant, or is that an officer?
No, I'm perfectly happy to take it because I'm involved with the spending of this money. Can I assure all members that the Salex money is very tightly controlled? We presented to Salex the detail of what we wanted to do. They awarded the money. We are now looking at every single project that we put forward. Some will be eliminated because they can't be achieved in the timescale. But that doesn't mean the money will disappear, and the money will still go on projects that fit in with the Salex requirement. As I say, Salex money is very tightly controlled. We have to report back to them. I think it's every month on progress, and I'm pleased that we've got a good team working on this. And just to put your mind at rest, we meet regularly, both at board level and at officer level to make sure that we're online to get this money spent to the benefit of everybody within Dorset. My target is to reduce as quickly as we can the carbon emissions. And I would take one other point that's been raised. Can I remind people that we have a phase target as well as a finish target? It's that last little bit that will become the most difficult to do. And as Anthony has already pointed out, we're going to hit the 75% carbon reduction a lot quicker, a great deal quicker than we'll hit the 100%. So I would ask people just to remember that this is a phase target, and we've stated that in the paperwork, which I'm sure everybody has read. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Biggs, did you wish to come back?
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful if there could be some sort of update as to what those projects are. You know, without putting mounts on there, I think it'd be people who are interested. It's not trying to catch people out or say that's a bad project. You know, I think that because just saying that people are working on it would, you know, it'd be nice to say that this is happening and also where it's happening, because they may all be in, I don't know, St Mary's School at the new one or in different areas. I think members would like to know that.
If I can just come back on that, Chairman, if I may, St Mary's doesn't feature in it. That wasn't on the list when we sent it forward to Salex, but I'm perfectly happy. And I see Karen Punchard wants to speak, so let me give way to her, and if necessary I'll come back, Chairman.
Okay, Ms Punchard.
Thank you, Chair. Karen Punchard. I'm Corporate Director for Place Services, and I've been very much involved in the decarbonisation bid and board. I just want to reassure Councillor Biggs that there are a range of Dorset Council properties that are included, so things like the day centres, schools, leisure centres, and the sorts of improvements that are being looked at were not the sort of everyday maintenance programmes. They are specifically to meet carbon reduction targets. So it's things like getting schools that are off grid at the moment onto grid using air source heat pumps, photovoltaic, and different kinds of technologies. So the key criteria for this fund is about energy systems, primarily some lighting systems. It's primarily about energy systems for a range of different Dorset properties. And I think once the board have agreed which properties are going to benefit from this scheme, then we can make that information available. Those decisions haven't quite been made yet because the survey work is still being undertaken, but as soon as we've got a finalised list, we'll look at communicating that more to councillors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Is that okay, Councillor Biggs? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, you wish to come back? You want an answer to hydrogen as an alternative to gas for housing?
Yes, I just wanted to know why it hasn't been included as an alternative, as an energy fuel for heating houses. It's perfectly possible to do it, and I think going forward it should be one of the main things that we're looking at for heating houses alongside heat source pumps.
Thank you. Would that be you, Mr. Selgren?
Chairman, might be Mr. Reeks or Mr. Littlechild as my sort of technical experts, although Karen may be able to answer this as well.
Okay. I'll go to Mr. Littlechild first and go back to Ms. Punchard. Mr. Littlechild.
Hi, thank you. Yes, just to sort of slightly reassure you, so the strategy in the building section on the strategy identifies obviously that the sort of retrofitting of housing and heating systems from moving away from fossil fuels is one of the biggest challenges. You know, we've got thousands of houses out there that will need to be switched over in time. It also recognises that there isn't yet a sort of an agreed position in terms of what direction heating systems will go in, but that it also identifies that there is will be a place for hydrogen and a place for heat pumps. It's just, I think at the time the strategy was written, obviously there was even less known about hydrogen. But we have had some discussions with some of the energy suppliers, the gas energy suppliers, so we're aware of some of the work that they're already doing to do tests on the networks for getting themselves sort of hydrogen ready, and I also understand that some of the boiler manufacturers are also developing sort of hydrogen or hydrogen gas hybrid sort of systems that could be easier to replace gas systems with. So I think basically what I'm saying is that you're going to need a sort of mixed economy of heating systems going forward, and that will sort of evolve and would definitely be sort of pushing for that mixture.
Thank you. Ms. Punchard, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to say, obviously the council isn't a housing provider as such, but we can certainly have influence in the way that we commission housing projects and the way that we work very closely with registered providers. So, you know, we've certainly got a role to play in the sorts of schemes that come forward in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I got the portfolio. I want to come back and briefly speak about hydrogen.
Yes, please, if I may. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Taylor is absolutely right, because she and I attended a meeting with one of the supply companies, and they were discussing, they were already converting pipework to take hydrogen. I've sat at a number of meetings recently where hydrogen has absolutely zoomed to the forefront, not least because our heavy commercial vehicles will be hydrogen powered. For those that don't know, I have a history in the heavy automotive vehicle industry, so I have lots of contacts in that industry, and they're talking 3 to 5 years for us to have hydrogen vehicles actually on the road. There's lots of experiments already going on with hydrogen, on hydrogen trains. There's hydrogen cars being produced in different parts of the world. All of this will come to the forefront, and as I've said many times, technology is going to take the lead on this, as well as finance, and we are keeping up as a council with everything that we can on the expansion of different markets. I would add, and Councillor Taylor is absolutely right. In fact, I think it was Anthony that raised it. At a recent meeting, there were several boiler manufacturers there. From May the 1st, the leading boiler manufacturers will supply you with a normal type of boiler that is able to be converted to take hydrogen when it's required. So yes, things are moving at a pace. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. And I've got Mr. Reeks for Dish to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, without sort of further labouring the point, just to offer members some comfort and draw together a few points that Anthony raised. We're very aware that, as Mr. Selgren has said, this is one of the largest pieces of strategy work that certainly I've been involved in, looking at its greatest extent over a 30-year period. So we have to reflect that this, by its nature, is a very dynamic piece of work. I think if members look at some of the actions, the slight criticism that we have had that Anthony reflected on around the vagueness of some of the language, it is actually a positive, because what we're saying is we're leaving the door open to investigate, to develop, to work with partners, central government, the private sector, as technologies develop. So just from looking at the renewable energy section of the action plan, that there's a variety of sort of focuses in there around working with the future of energy, working with providers, developing strategies to take on board that new technology. So I think that there can be some comfort there, specifically about the hydrogen technology. We're not quite there yet. As Councillor Bryant said, you know, since the strategy was written in its first draft, the hydrogen sort of technology delivery mechanism has moved on already. So we are there placed to react to all of those developments in this field. I think if I may, the important point is action has to be taken. We all know that things will change as time goes on. but to delay too long would have a negative impact on the carbon budget that we've allowed ourselves, which makes those sort of big reductions in the early years. We have to take action, and to some extent we have to work with the technology we have whilst being mindful and heavily involved in future developments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Okay, I've got no other members from across the chamber that wish to speak, so I'm going to move to the committee members now, and my first one is Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Chair. Get the camera off. Thanks very much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. Lots and lots of hard work by all officers concerned in all departments, so absolutely brilliant. My concern, one of my concerns, is the SALEX funding. A lot of town and parish councils apply for SALEX funding, but because of the latest lockdown, haven't been able to install by a certain time, which was the 31st of March. Consequently, SALEX funding not available. I mean, my own town council here in Sherborne applied for £40,000 of SALEX funding, which they ticked every box apart from the installation by the 31st of March couldn't achieve due to the lockdown and various other things. But so that to me is, if that funding is available, well, it's absolutely ridiculous that thing wasn't extended. So I'm asking Councillor Bryan if he can look into that and see what we can do, because town and parish councils are at the forefront of doing some of this stuff as well. I don't know yet if we have a feasible and affordable technical solution to hydrogen, etc. So I'd err with caution whether we're going to get that, and whether we're going to get that very soon. I do believe that the plan is aspirational and realistic, and I think that's important to point out that it is realistic and it is aspirational, because we don't know where we are on some of this stuff. So my question was about the SALEX thing, and can we lobby somebody to make sure that these really tight timelines, especially as we've got in Dorset Council on the 19.1 million, can be extended, and it's because the funding was available in the first place. So why is it available so it can extend some of those deadlines? Thanks.
Okay, could I have an officer to respond, please?
Chairman, it's John Selgren. So the lobbying process does continue. As you know, the leader of the council meets fortnightly with the Dorset MPs, and on a number of topics we've had considerable success in lobbying, so I'm sure that can go on. You may want to ask, if I may, Chairman, Councillor Bryan, from a view from a cabinet member perspective on this, and Simi from Ms Punchard from an officer point of view as well. But Councillor Andrews raised an extremely good and very pertinent question.
Okay, Councillor Bryan.
Making sure I click everything on. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, I take Councillor Andrews' point. One of my concerns is that we've got 19 million to spend, and it's a tremendously challenging situation where we have a target that is only a few months away and yet so much work to do. All I can assure Councillor Andrews is that I don't intend to allow the government to take their money back. So we will be lobbying heavily for an extension to time if needed, and I will also be only too pleased to lobby on the parish and town council's behalf that they get realistic timescales when money is handed out. So hopefully that answers Councillor Andrews' question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Bryan.
Okay, thank you. Ms Punchard, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, only to say, yes, it's unfortunate that the timescales were very tight on this occasion for all public sector organisations who were able to bid. I think we were very fortunate in Dorset Council in that we had a few schemes already prepared, and we've been able to move very quickly to appoint consultants to do the survey work. And again, just a reassurance that from an officer perspective, while we're not in lobbying mode, we do get engaged and involved in quite a lot of regional and national events around climate change, around different funding streams. So we are tied into those opportunities and obviously we make sure that we're in a position to put bids together at short notice, and quite often it is short notice, to try and attract as much funding as we can to Dorset and to Dorset Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Punchard. I think it's evident, isn't it, all the way through the document, through the report, and through the action plan, the sheer amount of lobbying that's going to be needed with government on various issues and aspects of this strategy is going to be an intrinsic part, and our MPs are obviously going to have a big part to play in that to make sure that we get a fair funding deal for Dorset to carry this forward. I've got Councillor Heatley next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to want to ask a question, and later on when we get to debate, I will pursue, depending on the answer to the question, either one or two of the amendments that I pursued last time. But can I start by saying that I think it's been absolutely right to concentrate on fossil fuel on carbon dioxide reductions that come from fossil fuels as the immediate and most urgent and most important focus. And I think we've done that pretty well. I'll have something to say on the targets later. But one of the things I have done, how shall I put it, in pursuit of constructive opposition, is to look at the plans of certain other councils, and I must admit I've come across nothing that is as good and comprehensive as this plan, and I think everyone should be congratulated for putting it together. And also I'm very impressed by our ability to generate money from government, and long may it continue. The consultation too has been a major and successful exercise, but I will be saying that maybe there's one bit of it that we need to look at and respond to a bit more seriously. And I also welcome Councillor Bryan's proposal that we review the council target in when there's a new council. Last thing, last time we talked about all this, I failed to acknowledge that the response document had got an amber category, things that we were partly including in the document, rather that we partly included in the document in the responses. This was something that worried me on the discussion in the EAP, and I was very pleased you responded to it, and I failed to thank the people for doing so because I think that improved it quite a lot. My question, is the Appendix 2 we have in front of us today the same as the Appendix 2 we had in front of us on the 25th of March? It is a vast document. I think it's the same, but maybe I haven't quite found the differences.
Okay, is that Mr. Littlejohn to answer, is that, or is that Mr. Reeks?
My apologies. I'm happy to take that, Chairman.
Yes, please.
The Appendix B that we have before us on the screen is subtly different from the original Appendix B that was published with the paper for the previous Scrutiny Committee, primarily around the changes in the Our Approach section. I wonder if the producer could scroll up the document if possible. Oh, no, sorry, down. Sorry. You'll see, while we're looking at it, in the Our Approach section, there's been 3 additional items added. Okay, I think I know what's happened here. Members, my sincere apology. There's been a little confusion between the 2 documents. If I could ask Anthony to share his screen, if possible, so I can show you exactly what those changes are. I think members will be aware this is quite a fast moving piece of work between the various meetings that have been held. So my sincere apologies for the confusion as to which document has been published. So before you on the screen, you will see the addition of 3 points in the Our Approach section, which have been added following a variety of discussions that have taken place. And they are to strengthen the understanding and approach to risks of climate change, adaptation and resilience. We considered that they were partly covered in the strategy as it stood. But we have also recommended a new action be inserted into the action plan, work with partners to fully understand the risks and opportunities of climate change to Dorset and to develop an agreed approach to climate change adaptation across Dorset. And you'll see that there's the target, the specific target there is to bring together climate risk assessments undertaken by former Dorset councils, to understand the risk faced by Dorset Council, to understand what actions are already taking place and to produce that plan by 2023. There is also an action relating to the baseline should be widened to include greenhouse gas emissions beyond carbon dioxide. The action there is to further explore and expand the Dorset County footprint beyond the data provided by central government to provide a wider understanding of Dorset's emissions, to include other greenhouse gases, agricultural land use and consumption where feasible. And finally, to expand the strategic approach to ecological emergency. Again, we consider it is partly covered by the items that you'll see in column F, but also to add in some new actions around work with key partners to develop an approach and methodology to monitor ecological quality, and also to work with internal and external partners to identify opportunities for large-scale rewilding. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor Heatley, and my apologies again about the confusion of the papers.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you for that. I mean, obviously, those go to some extent, the amendment I put last time on other greenhouse gases, adaptation and ecology. It's a bit hard for me to make up my mind at this moment whether I'm entirely happy with that. Can you give me the page references for those, so I can think about it a bit?
I believe it was possibly sent to you via an email, Councillor Heatley.
Separately?
I think so, yeah. I think I received it in an email.
Well, I didn't receive an email. Oh dear, lost emails are part of the
yes.
story.
It is, yeah. As I say, bearing in mind this is a living document,
look,
which
we haven't
is going to be subject to change. Yeah,
we haven't got that much time, so let's pass on at the moment. I will want to speak later, but
yeah, certainly, yeah. Okay. Just can I have a confirmation from officers? A bit of a silly question, but in terms of our monitoring of this going forward, this is going to be on the new performance tool. I take it I'm referring to page 50 at 9.16 in the document, and I'm assuming that this is going to be on our new performance tool for us to be able to keep a monitoring brief on this as a scrutiny committee.
Councillor Bartlett, I can respond to that, and maybe Matt can come in. I know that Matt and the team have been working with the business performance team to develop some indicators from climate change that can be included in the performance reports that they go forward to councillors. And I don't know if Matt can put any more detail on that. Matt?
Thank you, Karen. Yes, Chairman, we as Karen has said, we are working with the business development team to ensure that these specific climate and ecological emergency actions, where suitable and relevant, are included in the regular corporate monitoring against the red, green and amber status, and also at the same time working with that team to establish a sort of formal process for data collection across the council, which is so important for monitoring current carbon emissions against the carbon budget which we've given ourselves, so we can very clearly demonstrate on a regular basis where we are in terms of our emissions against our budgeted emissions in the strategy.
Okay, thank you. So that will be on the new performance monitoring tool. Okay. Councillor Heatley, I think you've still got your microphone on. If I can move now to Councillor Mark Roberts, please, for the next question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was really, I sit on the Farms Liaison Committee, and it's a question to do with the some of the references to the agricultural estate of Dorset Council. I just want to really be reassured that before we include any sort of targets or aspirations, that we actually have the science behind it. I would like to know that we are looking carefully that the latest science on carbon sequestration by grassland, both permanent pasture and temporary lays, and even crops such as maize grown with minimum tillage, compared to plant replacing those with trees, because I suspect that the figures will show that the trees are no better at sequestration than existing grassland, but I would like the science to prove that. And really, is Dorset's agricultural estate suitable for large-scale rewilding? And really, what does that mean? And terms like these are rather bandied around, and the public like the idea of them, but I think we might need to explain the importance of producing homegrown local food rather than some aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Yes, I take your point in terms of climate change. If we're having to move food around over greater distances rather than home produced, I take your point exactly. Yeah, Mr. Reeks, would this be for you to answer?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm very happy to come back on that one. Against a number of points, I think Councillor Roberts makes the very sagely wise point that carbon sequestration is achievable through a number of different land use methods. Over the years, we have a sort of a public opinion that tree planting is the only way to sequester carbon, and science is very much developing to say that although tree planting and trees themselves do play a really important and effective role in carbon sequestration, there is also a number of other land use issues, wetland restoration being one, permanent lay pasture, suitably managed rewilding, etc., that also offer a really valuable opportunity for carbon sequestration whilst benefiting the agricultural industry and also the general ecological value, landscape value of the area. So in probably reflecting the point I made around the hydrogen issue, the action plan is written in such a way that we are completely honest with ourselves that there is still investigation and development work to do on this point. So the action plan is more reflective around developing strategies for carbon sequestration using our land and other land, working with farmers and landowners to develop sort of best practice to combine not only carbon sequestration but also that ecological value point and the land use point. There's a lot of work going on in the background to the science of carbon sequestration around should charcoal be added to the soil, for example, to promote sequestration? What are the relative gains from land use adaptation? And also working particularly with our county farm tenants on developing best practice. And in some cases that will be agricultural production. In other cases that will possibly be rewilding or a hybrid somewhere in between. I think Councillor Roberts, we had some meetings already with how we can develop that approach working with our county farm tenants. So I guess in answer to your question, please be assured that from the delivery element of the action plan and the strategy, this isn't all about tree planting on agricultural land. This is about looking at it as an holistic package of bringing together all the many requirements that we have on our land stock and the land stock in Dorset to deliver the landscape value, ecological value, efficient and effective food production and carbon sequestration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeks. Did you wish to come back, Councillor Roberts?
No, thank you for the answer, Matthew. And I'm reassured that as we discover more data and investigate and get better answers, the plan will be amended to take account of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question surrounding, I think Dorset Council is responsible for 1% of the carbon in Dorset. So there's a terrific responsibility on the public and industries within Dorset to try and reduce that carbon emissions within Dorset and to meet those government deadlines or targets. Sorry. In order for Dorset to have as Dorset Council have an impact on this, it's very much, to a certain extent, it's not in our hands. And I just wondered whether one of the areas where we may be able to have some influence is in our statutory housing providers. Do we have an influence on them to encourage them to retrofit their housing estate assets? Just wondered whether officers have a view on that.
If I can assist Councillor Bartlett, I mean, yes, we do have influence because we commission specialist housing through adult and social care, and you know, we also work very closely with registered housing providers. So, you know, in our role as housing authority, we certainly do have influence and sway, and I think the registered providers themselves, certainly on affordable housing, are keen to embrace new technology because it's what the public want. On the private development side of things, again, you know, we've got more limited influence as a local authority, but I think you know, the general move towards greening housing development, it's becoming more of a selling point, and as the technologies become more established and become cheaper, I think the problem has been the cost of the alternative or greener technologies. But I think all of that is starting to become cheaper now. So developers are looking at things like making sure there is sufficient grid capacity for electric charging points, for example, and, you know, providing houses with air source heat pumps rather than relying on the gas network. So, you know, we're part of that movement really, and we can certainly exert influence where we're not a direct provider. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Ms. Blanchard. It is a frustrating, I have to say, from planning committees, it is a frustration that it does seem to be a very slow burn, this, in terms of giving that renewable energy provision within planning, within new builds, within new developments, and it has seemed that the building industry has been very slow to take this up. And even the state agents, you know, I think for many people they see it as a beneficial consequence of having those renewable energies built already into the houses rather than having to retrofit it. But we do seem to be moving very slowly as a nation down that approach when we compare to many countries in Europe, particularly in Western Europe, obviously. So it is a frustration. It's not quite borne out in the document, and I think that's one of the areas around the consultation exercise where I think, in terms of the wording within the consultation exercise, to get the feedback from the public, to get that buy-in, that Dorset Council, as I say, is responsible for 1% of the carbon footprint within Dorset. While we might meet government targets, the fact is that Dorset as a whole, both through its industry and through the public, unless they are going to be doing their part as well, then our 1% is going to be a drop in the ocean. I don't know if anybody has a comment on that. No, I'll leave it there.
I can try. I think as a local authority, as the lead local authority, I think we do have a community leadership role, and I think a lot of community groups, town and parish councils, look to Dorset Council for you know, a lead on this topic, and to provide help and guidance, which the team have done to a lot of community groups. So yes, we might only directly have influence on 1%, but I think what we do, how we do it, how we operate is you know, really important in demonstrating that leadership and helping others, you know, the public in their own homes and other community groups, town and parish councils, to, you know, achieve their own objectives.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think, as you say, we are a leader. And we're always told as members we're leaders within our community, and Dorset Council is obviously a leader within the county as a whole. And I think that going forward, in terms of a living document, there's going to be need some sort of strategy in there to basically move the public and industry within Dorset down that route to bring about a reduction in the carbon footprint. I've got Councillor Bryan, who wishes just to make a comment.
Yes, if I may, Chairman. At most of the meetings I attend, both the environment and planning comes up with on regular occasions, and you'll have no doubt noticed in the Queen's speech yesterday, both of these areas were highlighted. The environment sort of programme has very much come to the forefront, and linked with that, I will be very surprised, certainly on the conversations I've been having, if there isn't some form of let's say recommendation, but it'll obviously become law, that they start to put pressure on developers to look at the new build, but also for the housing associations, etc., to start looking at what they need to do. And obviously I'll be only too pleased to work with any of the housing associations, and I'll have a chat with Councillor Carr-Jones after this meeting to see whether we can't start talking to the housing associations to see what help they actually need in converting their properties. So I'll take that on as a single project for me, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the benefit that also comes out of that is helping those residents that are from a more pressured financial background, should we say, in accommodating that, because obviously energy bills are going up, and they're going to be quite a consequence in the future. I've got Mr. Selgren next.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to pick up your point, your question about kind of other policy agendas that may actually help, and again, some of the theme that Councillor Bryan was just developing. I just observed, for example, that the Farmer Report, national piece of work done for government, highlighted the challenges in the construction sector about the farmer trying to estimate the demand for construction in the UK over a period of time, and noted with concern that the traditional methods of construction were going to prove very, very challenging in order to deliver the scale of building that was anticipated. So the response to that, and government does appear to have seized this particular agenda, is to recognise the role that modern methods of construction might play. That's in the main things that are built largely in factories, but to very high standards, particularly around their ecological and environmental credentials. And just to pick up the point that's made about local housing providers, so the local Magna house, registered provider has taken a significant initiative to adopt modern methods of construction and to use a number of those units as part of future developments of theirs, which have a number of advantages. One is that it lowers the environment impact in terms of the construction of the property, but also that those properties are also built with high standards of environmental consideration. So I hope, Chairman, that just perhaps helps fleshes out some of the points that other colleagues have made around what I think is a sort of emerging societal theme around being more conscious of the environmental impacts, particularly in relation to property energy demands.
Yeah. Okay, I know Councillor Graham Carr-Jones is very keen on that modular housing, which I've raised for some considerable time now, because there's huge benefits, and it's come on technology-wise, it's come on a massive long way, as we will see. Technology advancing all the time. So just wanted to get my notes together in terms of, sorry, Councillor Roberts, you wish to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, I think it's probably appropriate before the debate because it's probably an officer answer required. And it was really wondering if we go on to accept this strategy, how will that fit in and affect the emerging local plan? And also within that sort of similar area, is it likely that we will adopt, rather like an equality impact, we will have a climate change impact assessment on any future council decisions? We have the environmental impact on planning, but is it likely that we may decide to implement a climate change impact on all future council decisions?
Fair point, Councillor Roberts. Mr. Selgren, do you want to answer that?
Thank you, Chairman. I might ask Ms. Punchard to fill in some of the detail on this, but Councillor Roberts is quite right. The importance of making sure that we've got policy alignment within the council. Clearly, what we don't want to do is have policies that are effectively inconsistent or create unintended policy outcomes. So yes, the work on the local plan is very much geared around making sure that the work that's been done through the EAP in particular and is represented in this strategy is picked up as part of the considerations of the local plan. And I think, and Councillor Bryan may wish to comment on this, but I'm certainly detecting that it is something that we need to make sure that all of our policies do reflect the environmental considerations. Indeed, just observing on this particular strategy, and I think comments were well made in when the report was introduced, that this report touches all aspects of the council's work, and certainly the officer work that we've got in place to take this forward reflects that, and we're working on a cross-organisational basis to make sure that all of the council's actions are pulling together to support the delivery of this strategy. Chair, I don't know if Ms. Punchard want to add anything else, or whether Councillor Bryan perhaps wants to make comment.
Okay, Ms. Punchard.
No, nothing further from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bryan.
Yeah, I've just put a note in the chat box, Chairman, that since we declared this emergency, all reports that come to any level of council have to have a section which shows the impact that any decision will have on climate. So yes, we are on board with this, and believe me, I'll be making sure that we actually strengthen it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for both those, all those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask officers, in terms of the consultation exercise, I've got two questions on that. One is, do they consider that sufficient, the way the consultation exercise was set up, that they had a sufficient response to highlighting sufficient diverse approaches to future energy provision? Do they believe that the public actually were able to engage in that? What I'm concerned about is that there's a tremendous amount of responses concerning solar power and wind power, because that's two of the energy provision aspects that are very much in the public domain. Often they're associated around the fact that nobody wants a wind farm in their backyard, and in some respects the report is heavily in favour of wind farm as a provision going in the future, which presumably is going to be outside source funding to bring that about, because they're hugely expensive to set up and even more expensive to decommission after their lifespan, which is only about 15 to 25 years, I understand. Whereas, of course, other aspects of energy provision going forward, such as wind such as tidal or wave power, which I think notoriously have suffered in terms of research and development funding, aren't quite in the same public foresight. They're not quite in the public's mind as easily as wind and solar power. So I just wondering if the officers, in terms of their consultative report, how they felt that sat with the public. Mr. Selgren.
Chairman, shall I just pick up the general point and then perhaps ask Mr. Reeks to come in on the specifics of this particular consultation, because you and members of the committee won't need me to remind you that, of course, you met, this committee met yesterday, and one of the reports that was before you was on grid capacity and the future energy provision in Dorset, and some concern I know that was raised by members about that, and important that we do have future grid power to take forward the aspiration for growth. So I would perhaps suggest, Chairman, that something you might want to do is to link those two pieces of reports. So just particularly for members of the public who are watching, and you did yesterday confirm that you wanted that piece of work to be progressed and indeed reported back. And also in parallel that the Dorset Local Enterprise Partnership, LEP, has also commissioned a study across the whole Dorset, that's Dorset Council and BCP area, and you've requested that both of those two pieces of work come back before this committee. So I might suggest, Chairman, that you've got the opportunity to link that piece of work with the points that you've just raised. But I'd perhaps offer, if you're willing, Mr. Reeks, the opportunity to comment specifically on your question about the consultation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Selgren. Mr. Reeks.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. I think just to sort of embellish that point slightly, I think, Chairman, the documents that were presented to the public for their opinion, if you like, the documents that we were consulting on, clearly show that, you know, our intention was that Dorset Council, directly, indirectly, and via our influence, would work with energy suppliers to explore all avenues of renewable energy generation within the area, develop zero carbon plans, as mentioned, work with the LEP to look at grid capacity in a green generation manner. And to that question, there was 75.6% agreement from respondents. When asked around the renewable energy action plan, so those specific actions that we put forward, there was an overall net agreement of 68.4% with the actions that we had proposed. And I think looking at the coded text comments that were received, bearing in mind the level of response, you know, 1,500 respondents to the consultation, and the question around how important people felt climate change was. So we were, you know, to some extent sort of singing to the choir. The respondents came back with suggestions around insisting that all new build extensions to be zero carbon, lobbying government to revise planning guidelines, investigate tidal wave, hydro, marine source heat pumps, etc., etc. They were all fairly, you know, fairly well talked about comments that were made by the public. So I think, in short, we provided enough information and opportunity to comment within the consultation, and the replies that we had back from the people that answered that consultation were well informed, and from the piece Anthony shared with you earlier on, some of that has been included as additional comments into the strategy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reeks. Thank you. No, okay, so can I move to some of the budget implications now within the consultation document, surrounding obviously there is a voice of opinion with some that the target dates that are laid out need to be quicker. I mean, and it is an emergency. We need to be moving faster, and that has obviously been expressed by some of the public consultation. I just wonder, within the consultation document, did officers highlight the fact that the quicker that we move on this, the greater the cost there is going to be to the public through council tax, because reliant on outside funding, government grants, etc., to achieve a lot of this strategy isn't going to happen, and some of this is going to have to be funded by Dorset Council itself. And the only revenue that Dorset Council have is through its council tax and through its business rates. So how was that highlighted to the public? The public given sufficient knowledge within that consultation exercise that if things were to move faster, then, as has already been alluded earlier in this committee meeting that there was going to be a price to pay. I think Councillor Bryant reflected from the finance portfolio holder that it was another 5% on the council tax, was it, I think? So could I have an answer to that, please? Did the public get sufficient information within this consultation document to move faster? It's going to be that much more expensive. Mr. Selgren?
I'm actually looking to my colleagues, if I may, Chairman, just to pick up on the detail of that one. I think Mr. Reeks is coming online to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, I've got so many screens open on my computer now. I'm struggling to find the right one. Yes, so within the strategy text, there is a clear piece making reference to the total cost of the total cost of implementing the proposals. Just bear with me a second. I'm very sorry. That will be Dorset Council alone will need to invest many millions of pounds, over £100 million over the next 20 or 30 years. Furthermore, in the actual consultation document itself, there was a question. Sorry, Chairman, bear with me. There was a question around funding the response, which was asking respondents whether they agreed with our approach to funding the actions required to implement the strategy, investor safe schemes, capital receipts through asset rationalisation and building into our capital programme, as well as exploring options to raise additional funds through borrowing and council tax. So all options were sort of clearly laid before the consultation document, and in the initial sort of introduction to the strategy, there is sort of clear reference made to the relationship between the cost of the initiatives and the deliverability and timescale. Thank you. Ms. Punchard, did you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll just, I guess, draw your attention to section 2 of the covering report, financial implications. And again, as Matt has highlighted, we did ask some questions on this, and there was some information provided to the public. I think the important thing is that, yes, it is a lot of money for the council to find, and at the moment, particularly with the publication of the Environment Bill, we don't know what level of additional resource there might be in the future from government sources. Nevertheless, we have got some projects identified to be funded through capital, through the capital programme from next year onwards, and I think that the finance portfolio holder has given a commitment that the savings that we achieve from the decarbonisation programme will also be able to feed into a new revenue stream to fund the action plan associated with this strategy. But clearly, it's something that we're going to have to keep under review and take opportunities that present themselves, and yes, that review and how much we are able to achieve may well have an impact on the target date, and that's something that we will be keeping an eye on and reporting back on. Thank you.
Thank you. So when Cabinet give this the final approval, what budget amount has been set aside for its first year of implementing the strategy?
I think Aidan is online and can answer that.
Yeah, Mr. Dunn.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Aidan Dunn, the Executive Director for Corporate Development and responsible for financial strategy. So if I could connect up a few points that we've heard on the financials. So first of all, the estimated cost over the next 20 to 30 years of this programme is about 127 million, and that's a combination of both revenue and capital. We've also heard that well, we know that Dorset Council's under financial strain at the moment. We've got pressures in adults, adult care, children's services, education as well. And we also heard in the earlier part of the presentation that residents, climate change is one of the priorities. The resident survey is also interested in investment in highways and waste. So Cabinet has a really difficult job of balancing out these priorities. Our approach, therefore, to fund the 127 million and beyond has been our priority is to draw in external funding through government grants, and already made great progress, as we've heard, with the decarbonisation grant of 19 million. The next area is about drawing on our own council resources, and our primary source of funding for that is around the capital programme. So what the last month at Cabinet in April, Cabinet approved the capital programme for this financial year, and in that there wasn't a particular amount set aside this specific financial year, but for next financial year and the next 4 years, we've indicated indicative levels of funding to contribute to buildings retrofitting, electrical vehicles, energy management systems, and indeed investing in a renewable energy generation. So whilst Cabinet hasn't agreed in the capital budget yet for future investment, it's on the schedule of potential investments for next year and beyond. So Cabinet are well cited in that in the context of decision making. And I think I'd just reinforce the point that Karen has just made, that the portfolio holder for finance has emphasised that point that by capital investment, it might well, or ideally it will free up revenue. For example, the cost of running buildings reduces, and he is particularly keen that the revenue freed up will be reinvested in carbon reducing services. So there's a degree of reinvestment. The final point I'd like to draw through goes back to your opening question on this topic, Chair, around what did residents say, or those that responded to the survey say. So Matt Reeks has explained that we gave a quick overview of the financial strategy and asked, do you agree? And so what we saw through the survey results, and that's on page 135, 136 of this paper, is around about 14% of residents either disagreed or strongly disagreed with the programme. So the balance, the 86% of residents either agreed or didn't have a particularly strong view. So that, in a way, that's a degree of endorsement. But the really useful bit of the question, I think, is, have we missed any ways in which we can fund this? Any other ways that we haven't outlined? So page 136 on the report details we had 368 responses with suggestions of other ways that we could contribute, and we'll be looking at all of those. I mean, many of them talk about council tax increases, or could we levy extra charges on tourists, that sort of thing, level of fines. So all of those we'll be looking at and considering as we seek to find ways of funding this clear priority over the coming years. So back to the very first question, have we got anything set aside in this financial year? The answer is no at this stage. We've got the SALEX funding, this decarbonisation grant, that's our priority area of spending, but we have got indicative amounts of capital investment over the next 4 years in the capital programme. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Dunn. Very comprehensive answer. So my question on this is, all my observation of it is that in terms of the future performance monitoring that we're going to be doing over this strategy for climate change is going to need to coincide with the financial funding that's going to be given to the team that are going to be executing the various projects within this strategy to bring about that reduction in Dorset Council carbon footprint. Because if we don't marry up the actions by the team with the amount of funding coming in, when we come to doing a performance monitoring on it, we're going to find that the team won't have completed the various tasks within their action plans because they haven't had the funding to do it. So are we on top of that?
Yeah, so from my perspective, an example of this in the context of the wider council as well. So at June Cabinet, we're bringing along the, the July Cabinet is the next opportunity where we bring along the financial performance as well as the sort of operational performance data. So as part of the council's evolution, we're bringing together all the key performance indicators with the financial story as well, and that ranges from our spend in adult care and the responses there through to our spend on climate and the impact that it's having. So it's integrating into our performance framework. Yes.
Okay, so basically your colleagues, Aidan, will ensure that there's the money there for John's colleagues to get on and do the work.
We will take our steer from Cabinet on that, but
Okay.
that's the principle. Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, members, I think we're about there, and I'm going to move into a small debate, I think, with the members before we go back to recommendations, so that everyone can have their final say on that, if that's okay. And the first part I've got that's been highlighted through this has been the council tax, the target dates, budget capability, performance reviews, technology changes and advancements. It's a living document, and quarterly return for review to scrutiny. I'm guessing it'll be a quarterly review. So I'm going to go to Councillor Adkins first, who I think he just had a question that would take us into the debate, I think.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Chair. A lot of my question was actually answered just in, a second ago, but looking at the budget and if the council was going to pay for this and for the target going forward, if we brought the target forward, one of the things that strikes me is that what is the risk on successful delivery? The officers, should be commended with an exceptionally detailed report. It demonstrates how serious that they've been, and that they have listened. And one thing that an officer said to me in a meeting the other day, which struck me, was we have a reputation of delivery. When it comes to government grants and everything else and getting government funding, Dorset is trading on its reputation for delivering, excuse me, on those projects. So I think listening to the fact that we have a potential 100 million a year to be raised in council tax if we bring it forward, whereas it's integrated and it's through existing budgets, if it's 2040, I come to the conclusion that the target is realistic. It doesn't put it at risk, the project at risk. And Councillor Taylor, unfortunately, I got cut off at a certain point, but Councillor Taylor said something quite poignant in that words and actions are totally different when talking about the public, and that's the one thing. The public are pro this, but there is a huge gap between that and what they're willing to pay. And if it's 5% on the council tax, that's a huge ask on top of the usual council tax bill. So that was the observation I was going to make. It was a question I did have around putting meat on the bone with regard to the 5%, but I think that if we do bring the target forward, given this report, that there is a risk of not delivering. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adkins. And I've got to say, I haven't read the report. I'd concur with your views as well. I think there is a risk. I think it's, in terms of the delivery timeframes as we've got laid out in this, it's ambitious. It has its own inherent risks as it stands at the moment. I think to try and bring some of those timelines forward would create additional risk, which then would have a reputational impact on the authority. But I do appreciate that while not all agree, the vast majority of people agree, certainly that's come out in the consultation would agree that there is a climate emergency. But I think those timelines to try and increase those and the additional financial implications on that, particularly to our residents in Dorset, do pose a concern. I've got Councillor Heatley to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. We are doing scrutiny of this. We are doing scrutiny of the consultation, and I think we are also doing scrutiny to an extent of whether the scope, original objectives of the work have been reached. Out of the consultation, the single biggest point of contention has been the targets, and there is a lot of debate about it out there. I accept that the majority view, narrowly, was that the targets are satisfactory, and I accept too that quite a lot of the votes against the targets were probably not from people who want the targets accelerated. But nevertheless, I am a bit concerned about our process on this. I think we should respond to that consultation, but I am concerned that the debate on the targets has not properly been had in Cabinet or in full council. And remember, we still have a couple of motions from councillors on what the target should be. What particularly concerns me is that I think that the debate has been uninformed. Those who want faster targets very crudely say things like, well, if we don't do it faster, it's an emergency and we'll all die. While on the other hand, wise heads shake their heads and say this is impossible, it's unrealistic, but there isn't really an explanation of why it's unrealistic. We've heard Councillor Taylor, Councillor Biggs saying we should be more aspirational. We've heard Councillor Roberts saying he wants to see more of the science behind the targets. And I do think a paper should be produced for Cabinet and for full council, which sets out some of those issues and also some of the financial issues that you've mentioned. So that's the purpose of the first bit of the amendment I'm suggesting we should take to the recommendation that's in the chat bar. That we produce one page, well, that might be a stretch, but I'm quite keen on one-page documents, giving the reasons for and against the target of zero emissions by earlier dates as compared with the dates in the plan. And I realise too that aspiration and realism kind of miss each other. There's a way you have to make a judgment between those two. But I do think that we owe it to Cabinet, full council, to have a rather fuller discussion of the facts before people. My second suggestion is to do with the things I mentioned last time and that were part of my exchange with Mr. Littlechild. One of the effects of a consultation which is done by saying, well, what do you think of our document? What do you think of this section? What do you think of that section? What do you think of the other section? Is that it makes it quite difficult for people to comment on the things that they think maybe are not sufficiently covered. And then when you're coding it and so on, it's all a bit difficult deciding where it should go. Now, I recognise Mr. Littlechild has sent me a version of Annex B, which does meet some of the points that I've made before on adaptation, other greenhouse gases and ecology, but I don't think it goes far enough. Partly, I don't think it goes far enough because all of these subjects have a very strong bearing on land use, rural land use. We are a rural county, and if we want to show leadership in climate change, we ought to be showing leadership in the rural area in particular. There's no point us being worried about steel manufacture or something like that. And in the rural area, and I'm picking up from something Councillor Roberts said here, there is conflict about land use. We may well want to do carbon sequestration by planting trees or even having peat bogs, but equally adaptation may be telling us that we've got to provide more local food to increase our food security. We've got to have that debate. These things mix together, and it's all a bit more complex than it seems to me is laid out in the plan at the moment. It's difficult. It's politically extremely difficult, because one thing that came out from the residents' survey is what people like about Dorset is it's green and pleasant land, as it is, and I understand that, but I do think we ought to be facing in the longer run some of these land use issues. So I think we should recognise here that there is a connected set of things that we need further work on. Not at any enormous pace or anything, but it's something we've really got to come to terms with. Secondly, the other thing has come from something you said, Chair, and our perennial debates about electric cars and hydrogen and so on and so forth. We need to recognise that there's one huge generic area where change will come about, and that is technology. If someone comes up with a viable fusion reactor sometime in the next 10 years, a lot of what we've been talking about will be nonsense. But we don't know. But it is possible that these things will happen, and I think we should recognise them rather more explicitly. That's why I'd like to lay this amendment, please.
Okay. Yeah, I don't like the word impossible. I think there's always ways of achieving things, and I think we've seen that time and time again in terms of certainly with man's technological advancement. Before we actually move to proposal, Councillor Heatley, bearing in mind this is a living document, and we've just scrutinied it for it to go to give our recommendation for it to go to Cabinet with our approval. This piece of work, the amendment, would it be possible to, if we did this as an additional piece of work that would then coincide with when we have that back before scrutiny, perhaps in the next quarter, for us to review the performance of it? You said in your comments that there wasn't necessarily an urgency at this very minute to do it. I was wondering whether or not the officers would have time to work it up to then do us that piece of work to bring it to coincide with our next performance monitoring of the climate strategy.
And that applies to the second part of my amendment, but not the first part.
Okay.
I mean, in a spirit of creative friendliness, I'm willing to consider your thing on the second part.
Okay. Did you have your proposal in writing?
I put it in the chat bar.
Okay, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. Okay, I've got a number that want to speak. Yeah, I've just had it confirmed by my colleague that it hasn't come through on the chat bar, Councillor Heatley. So if you can,
come through on my chat bar.
If you can try and do that, and I'll go to Rod Adkins, who's requested to speak. Councillor Adkins.
Thank you, Chair. Just a query to possibly Councillor Bryan or one of the officers as regarding, because what strikes me about Councillor Heatley's proposal there is that yes, we need to keep up with new technologies as they arise, and that the council to be reactive to that. As far as the target is concerned, can the council assure us that the officers assure us that that target date is what's achievable today rather than what's achievable next week? If technology or funding comes, does that bring it forward? That would be the question I'd ask the officers. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure that they can answer it, but we'll have a go. Mr. Selgren, do you want to defer that to one of the technical officers?
Can I? Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Littlejohn or Mr. Reeks?
Hello, let me to respond. So in terms of the 2040 target, that is currently based on what we think is currently achievable, and I think within the paper and within the document itself, we've recognised that we would endeavour to do that as fast as possible, but that's what we feel at the moment is a realistic target. If funding and technology were to come forward at faster rates, then that would potentially allow that to happen at a faster rate.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
It's a big if, isn't it? If the technology is forthcoming, which I no doubt it will be, but of course we don't know within what time frame. Okay, so before I go to, does that answer your question, Councillor Adkins?
Yes, I mean the key there was that the council's willing to bring that target forward if funding and technology affords. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so before we move into this debate, I've got a proposer for the amendments that are in the chat bar. One is a one-page document produced giving the reasons for and against the target of zero emissions by earlier dates as compared to the dates in the plan. And two, there is recognition that within this living document, further work will be required on adaptation of the greenhouse gases and ecology and in response to future technical change. Before I ask if there's a seconder for that, so we can actually debate that, my committee clerk wishes to speak. So, Ms. Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, obviously this wording has been proposed and it says but noting that. So can I clarify with Councillor Heatley, are we including the wording around supporting the strategy and recommending it to its final approval to Cabinet and full Council as the sort of initial wording, and then your points 1 and 2 to follow that?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have a proposal from Councillor Heatley. Is there a seconder to this? No, no one's seconding it. Okay, then it doesn't progress then. I think Councillor Heatley, I think that when we have this come before us at the next performance look, I think then possibly we could have a conversation around some of this at that time, because we'll have a certain understanding by that point as to how things are progressing within the strategy.
Well, thank you for listening to me.
Did you wish to comment, Councillor Heatley?
No further comment at this point.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Roberts to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think in response also to Councillor Heatley, I think the officers have reassured me that this is a living document and that any changes will be incorporated as we progress. So I'm quite happy to propose the recommendation as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Shortell, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to make a few comments about changes to any proposals for the target date. Well, a climate and ecological emergency action plan is crucial for many reasons. It sets out the measures needed to get to a net zero by a target date. It represents a commitment to properly addressing the climate and ecological emergencies, and its creation provides an opportunity to bring communities together around that focal point. Dorset Council is in a unique position to facilitate and lead this process, given officers' knowledge of and role in local communities, but cannot be expected to have all the answers. Without widespread cooperation, any plan will be much more challenging to roll out in such a complex modern society and economy. Some councils are producing their plans on a low or no budget, largely drawing on the support of volunteers, whilst others are commissioning plans from consultees. This is much more likely to happen if people feel that they were listened to, and that the plan actually addresses their own need and aspirations, which is based on a solid foundation. So they have something to gain from it. Process is all important here. So budgets and officers' time should be spent wisely and not implemented without due consultation to financing and current constraints. So therefore, I firmly believe that the set date should be the target date, and that we will work towards that. And then if we are able to bring anything forward, then that is the benefit. But I think the target date should remain as it stands. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I remind members that this is obviously it's an informal meeting, and the decisions that we're making are minded to decisions. So while I do have a proposal on the table, I gather, Councillor Adkins, that you wish to second the proposals on the table.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay. I know that my committee clerk wishes to come in, and I think it will be surrounded in the fact that we are only obviously making minded to decisions. Okay, so we are giving a steer. Miss Watson, did you want to comment?
Thank you. No, it was only just to clarify the point with regards to the seconder, which I appreciate was in the chat bar, but I just wanted that to be clear for the public listening and for the record. And yes, as you say, it is a minded to decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts, you wish to come back?
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, it was really just to confirm that part of the reason that I felt we should propose this recommendation was just really to highlight the net agreement methodology, which appears, and maybe one of the officers can confirm, that it really shows overwhelming support for the strategy, because every single part of it was a positive. And I know I'm not sure if other councils use the net agreement method, but it does appear to show overwhelming support on all items, which should give us the confidence to go ahead and make this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Okay, members, I've come to the point now that if there is no dissent, the recommendation is laid out is the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee consider the outcomes of the consultation and amendments to the Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan and recommend its final approval to Cabinet and full Council. And we've had a long and lengthy debate over this and question period with the officers. And if there is no dissent, then I'm happy for this committee to make a minded to decision to support the recommendation. Okay, I'm not hearing any dissent, so I think we'll take that as approved then, members. Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. Having made a minded to resolution, I think the next stage then is to call upon the the executive director for Place then to actually make a decision in public in the light of your committee's minded to view. And this is simply to satisfy the legal position, Chairman, that as an informal meeting today, you can't actually make a decision, but legally an individual officer can make that decision. And I think when these arrangements were considered by the full council, members considered it important that the actual decision should be made in public in the same meeting. So I think it's important that the director should have the opportunity now to round up and to say what his decision is in the light of what he's heard from the committee, and then we'll be taking that forward into the cabinet meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying the legal position, Mr. Mayor. Okay, if I could come to Mr. Selgren, who has a delegated authority.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm just conscious this is we're breaking new ground with this, so I'll just look to Mr. Mayor to make sure that when I do this, I've got this procedurally correct as we are seeking to work within these temporary provisions. But Chairman, I confirm that the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee is minded to support the recommendations in the report and to recommend those for consideration by Cabinet and by full council. Chairman, just grateful if Mr. Mayor could confirm that is procedurally correct in how I've described that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Chairman, that's correct in how it's been described. I think what we need is for the director to confirm that in the unusual circumstances that we're working in, that he is now making that decision and will in effect recommend on the committee's behalf into Cabinet that they support the recommendations as set out.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chairman, if I may then, so I confirm that I will do that. I'll take it upon myself to, on having heard the debate in full of the committee and your discussions and your considerations, that I will make that recommendation on behalf of the committee to the Cabinet when it meets on the 18th of May.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. What strange times we live in.
Yeah, and Chairman, that they are strange times, and it is awkward for us as officers to in effect sit here, listen to democratically elected members and have to pop up at the end and formally make the decisions ourselves. But that is because the regulations of allowing virtual meetings have lapsed, and we are in that very unusual position. And we are, of course, very respectful of the views that members have arrived at, and I'm glad that the director is able to come up at the end of the debate and to formally and procedurally endorse everything that's happened. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's hoping we can all get back in the room again at the earliest opportunity when the government tell us we can.
Chairman, I'm happy to support the committee in this way, but I'm also rather hoping that this won't be something I have to make a regular practice of, because as the monitoring officers recommended in a member-led council, it's far more appropriate that members make representation to their colleagues on the Cabinet. But as Mr. Mayor's explained, as we're not currently able to do that due to the very unusual circumstance, indeed, in my local government career, unprecedented situation, I'm very pleased to do that on the committee's behalf and with your blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I close the meeting, can I extend my thanks to the members of the committee for their forbearance for what has been a long meeting, but I think we finally got there, and we've given the climate and ecological emergency strategy consultation results and recommend changes to final draft a thorough going through. Can I thank all of the officers for all their hard work? It was an immense report, a fantastic piece of work, and thank you to everyone. I'm going to close the meeting. Oh, sorry, I've got to go to exempt business, urgent items, agenda item 6, of which there aren't any. Agenda item 7, exempt businesses, and again there is none. So on that, Ms. Watson, I'm going to close the meeting at 12:35. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.